friends. I'm Karen, and this is the Family Food for Moms podcast. We're talking about inspiration for family cooking and dining. Today, we're going to be talking about cooking vegetables and starches, building flavor, making them taste good, not overcooking them. So this is part of our basic cooking skills series. It's cooking skills that you should master. And it is very much an ongoing process and a trial and error process. There are often times when things go wrong. I make mistakes, burn the pot underneath the steamer when it runs out of water. And then the best thing is to learn from that and do better next time. So let's get started. Cooking vegetables well is about more than just getting them to be soft. The goal is to get the right texture, that's a pleasing texture in the mouth, the right color, the right flavor, what you add, and to also preserve the nutrition in the vegetables, to know which method does that best. For example, cooking vegetables in water will leach the nutrients and the color out of the vegetables, which is fine if you're making soup because then the liquid remains. But if you're throwing away the liquid, that's not great. So, steaming is one of the best ways to cook vegetables. Vegetables should generally be tender enough to eat comfortably, but still retaining a little firmness, that nice bright green color of broccoli when it's just ready. So, that little bite that's left really makes them delicious and ensures they remain nutritious. So there are different types of steamers available. Electric steamers are useful because then you just turn it on and leave it. You don't have to watch it. But most of them are plastic. And to steam something inside a plastic container is not healthy. We used to have a stainless steel steamer, and it had trays, electric steamer, trays that you could stack on top of it, and then put different foods in there to steam. But when it died, we could not find another one that was stainless steel. There were glass ones available, so that's also a good option. But what we found easier was just to get a stainless steel little tray that you slip inside a pot. So it's got holes in it, and it flaps up and down as you need, so that you can add the right amount of veg depending on the size of the pot as well. So it fits in many different pots. And then you put water in the bottom, and then you steam, and you have to remember to turn it off in time so the water doesn't run out. It's usually fine for 20 minutes to half an hour if you add water up to the base of this metal steamer. So that works great. And then you get a bamboo steamer, which you put on top of a pot. It's got different layers as well and a lid. This would be used in a lot of Chinese cooking. So that one as well, you need to watch out for when the water runs out, but it works really well, and it's a good healthy material to steam in. So it's also a very simple way to cook vegetables because it tastes so good. It preserves the natural flavor. So you basically steam it and eat it. You can add a bit of salt if you want to, or a bit of butter, but it always tastes good with nothing. Not even salt is necessary, which is great. So putting the water in your pot, putting the steamer there, and then bringing it to a simmer or a boil. I usually put the vegetables in immediately while the water's heating. Some people say to wait until it's simmering, but I don't think that's necessary. So the key is not to overcook them and to remember that they're going to cook a little bit more once you turn the plate off before you take the lid off. If you want them to stop steaming immediately, then you actually need to take the whole steamer out of the water. So that's a bit of a pain. So best to just undercook them a little bit until they're a nice color and firmness. So with broccoli, like long stem broccoli, they need to be bright green. And then you just poke them and see, not too soft, definitely not squishy. I do often overcook mine because I forget about them. And it seems like they're not quite ready, but they'll continue cooking a little bit even if you take them out of the steam. You can always turn the steamer pot on a bit longer if you find you're not sure and you want to turn them off a bit early, but then they end up being a little hard. Also, if you're steaming early and you're going to reheat a bit later, then a little bit underdone is good. So I usually find 20 minutes to half an hour with some vegetables like green beans, broccoli. 20 minutes is probably best. Half an hour is probably a bit long. Things like asparagus, they should remain vibrant and bright, not dull or olive green. Artichokes, whole artichokes, my favorite food. Those would take a little longer, so half an hour, maybe even a bit more. So just poke it with a fork when you think it should be ready. Take the lid off and check, and then you'll know. And then after you finished steaming them, you can add your salt or your butter or olive oil. Lemon juice is nice on things like broccoli, or even a little grated cheese. That's very nice with cauliflower. My favorite way to use vegetables, in fact, is soups. I think that it tastes the best and you get the best nutrition because you can add things like bone broth. So we do quite regularly cauliflower soup and broccoli soup. And these are so easy. You just put some bone broth or stock from the stock pot into the bottom, about 4 to 6 big ladles. And then you put a whole lot of broccoli florets or cauliflower florets. For our family of 7, we do about 3 heads of broccoli or cauliflower. And then you add salt. You add a little water if you need to, but you don't want to add too much water because it's great if the soups are thick. So then bring it up to about halfway up the vegetables in the pot. Then you put the lid on and cook it for about half an hour or until the vegetables are soft. We usually add a couple of potatoes to the broccoli soup, but it's not necessary for the cauliflower. And then we blend them at the end. You can add onion powder if you want to, or herbs, but we like to keep them clean and easy, and they taste so good. When you blend them at the end, you can add cream or coconut cream if you prefer not to have dairy. You can grate a little cheddar cheese in there, and it gives them a great flavor. And then obviously season at the end, add your salt if you need to, and a swirl of olive oil when you serve them. And I put those in the fridge to have daily or the freezer, or we have them as an appetizer for a meal. And it's a great way to get your vegetables in. One of the favorite ways for the kids as well to eat vegetables. If you're making a more complex soup or even a stew, like a potato and sausage soup, for example, then you're going to start with your mirepoix, fancy French word for the base of the soup. So the vegetable base is usually 2 parts onion, 1 part carrot, and 1 part celery. That's by weight. So you chop all of those to a similar size. You chop up your carrots, you chop up your celery, and you chop up your onion. And then you gently cook those in butter or coconut oil or whatever oil you use. So you don't brown it, but you want to start to soften it and release those natural flavors. So that's your foundation for the soup and for the stock, or your stew. The aromatic foundation, they say, because it's got a lot of flavor. So starting with those veg gives the soup the base of flavor, and then you're going to add whatever else. So if it's a potato soup, you can even sweat your potatoes along with those vegetables. And then you're going to add your broth and your water and your seasonings, your herbs, spices, etc., and cook that. And then you would cook your sausage meat separately till it's nice and caramelized, and then you add that near the end. So soups work well once you've added that base. You can basically add any other vegetable. You can add zucchini and make a zucchini soup. So our soup is very simple that we make regularly. It's just got the cauliflower or the broccoli. But you can certainly add this vegetable mirepoix to the soups you make, and it'll bring out the flavor and make them more complex. And those are always delicious. So be creative, have some broth ready, and then decide what kind of soups you want to try. Vegetables are very forgiving in soups, especially, and they work out very well. You can blend your soup, or you can leave it chunky, or you can partially blend it. You could take some of the chunks out, blend what's there, and then put them back. Another soup that we love, which I mentioned in the previous episode, is a lentil and barley soup. So this one's also made in a broth base, and you would also start with your mirepoix, and then you can add red lentils, like a whole packet full. You can add a couple of tablespoons of barley, one potato grated, and one carrot grated. And then add some onion powder, some salt, some herbs like basil or oregano. And then you basically cook them on low for a few hours until the red lentils have disappeared, kind of been incorporated to make the soup thick. So you don't blend the soup. You can blend it a little bit to make it smoother, but it'll still have the texture. Or you can just leave it as it is and enjoy it. And of course, you need to season that at the end again. Make sure you add more salt and whatever you think it needs. As you're cooking your soups, you need to taste as you go and taste towards the end. Add the layers of flavor, especially towards the end and at the beginning when you put the vegetables in. When you're making a stew, then with vegetables, you're also going to start with softening those onions, carrots, celery, and then maybe some garlic, which you add a bit later because that burns quickly. So you just soften them and release their natural flavors. And then you're going to add whatever else you're going to use for your stew. So your stock or broth, tomatoes, water, your meat that's been browned, beans, etc. And then you would put them either in a pot on the stove or in the oven or in a slow cooker, crock pot. Those work really well for stews. And they're nice and tender, the vegetables in a stew. And the flavors nicely incorporated throughout. Then roasting your vegetables. Roasting brings out a kind of different character in the vegetables. Because of the high dry heat in the oven, you're going to get that sweetness, caramelization, browning. It's going to be a deeper, sweeter, more concentrated flavor. So this works great for something like butternut. Steaming butternut or pumpkin is going to give you a lighter flavor than the roasted vegetable. If you roast your butternut in the oven, it's going to be sweeter, more caramelized, a richer flavor. So a very basic, easy way to do it is to put them on a baking tray with some oil and salt. Now, this works best if your pieces are quite small. Chopping the butternut, squash, or the pumpkin quite small and then roasting them with oil and salt. It's going to bring out the flavor. They're going to be nice and crispy and hopefully soft on the inside. If you have bigger pieces and you want to make sure your vegetables are tender, then it's better to roast them in some kind of closed dish because then it adds steaming to the roasting. So you just dump a whole lot of butternut pieces into a glass or ceramic dish. You add your oil and your salt and then your lid. And then that takes about half an hour to 45 minutes to cook to a nice tender caramelized vegetable. So we would do butternut squash, as I said, and pumpkin in the oven. Sweet potato pieces work well. Sweet potatoes, and potatoes, you can just put them whole in the oven. Wash them, put them on a baking tray, sprinkle them with oil and salt. Again, that's my favorite thing to do. Olive oil is great. It gives a good flavor and it doesn't get too hot and become rancid. Generally, you'll roast your vegetables at about 180 Celsius, 360 Fahrenheit. If the oven is too hot, then they can burn before they're soft. You can also do some vegetables like broccoli and Brussels sprouts in the oven on a baking tray, but I'm not crazy about that. I prefer those to be soft in the steamer. But you could also do those in the oven with the lid and it'll work better because then they'll get more tender. Some people like crispy Brussels sprouts. I like tender Brussels sprouts. You can do carrots in the oven in a closed baking dish. When you add your oil and salt, you can toss your vegetables slightly and you can even add some herbs. And then halfway through the cooking, you should also toss them a little bit. So the basic principle is the larger the piece, the longer it takes to cook. And you want to make sure the outside doesn't burn before the inside is soft. So if it's open on a baking tray, smaller pieces. If it's in a dish with a lid, then it doesn't matter as much. Caramelizing is one of the great things you can do to vegetables, especially things like onion. Caramelized onions are delicious. When the vegetables are cooked long enough for their natural sugars to brown, then they develop a deeper, sweeter, more complex flavor. So the raw onion would be kind of sharp and pungent, but slowly cooked caramelized onions become soft and sweet and deeply flavorful. When you're cooking, sauteing vegetables, and you want that good caramelization, then it's best not to move them around too often in the pan, but to make sure they don't burn. So just check and move now and then, but don't constantly be moving them, and that'll help them to get that good caramelization and deep color. Things that work well are mushrooms, even carrots, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Those are good for caramelization and browning. Also, if you are cooking something like mushrooms, you may find you need to put a lid on partway through to help. That little bit of steam always helps them cook properly. Otherwise, maybe they'll be browned before they are soft. So I always start with sauteing the mushrooms in a bit of coconut oil with some salt, and some nutmeg and paprika. And then as they start to caramelize, then adding a lid and then letting them steam a bit, and that helps them to be soft as well as the beautiful caramelization on them. And then when you are deglazing a pan, if you do some roast or you saute vegetables and then you see the brown bits stuck to the bottom of the pan, those are wonderful to add to your stews or soups. If you're making soup in the same pot, then they'll naturally be added. If you're transferring to the crock pot or a baking dish, deglazing is a great thing to do. So that's when you add a small amount of liquid to your hot pan. It could be stock or broth, it could be water, could be wine, any combination of liquids, and that'll soften the brown pieces and let them and loosen them off the bottom of the pan. And then you scrape the pan and you add that liquid with the bits of caramelized meat or vegetables and add that to your stew or soup, to your crock pot, and that'll add a depth of flavor. Be really delicious. Next time we'll talk about starches, potatoes, rice, pasta, etc. So, some extra tips for cooking your vegetables well to kind of recap. Don't cook all your vegetables the same way. Think about what you want. Tender vegetables like zucchini, asparagus, and spinach, they don't need much cooking. Whereas carrots, potatoes, pumpkin, or butternut squash need more time and a different method usually. Cutting vegetables into similar sized pieces is really helpful. Helps everything to be cooked evenly and well. Don't overcrowd the pan, the same as with meat. Too many vegetables release a lot of moisture. So if you're wanting them to brown, not steam, then don't put too many in at once. You don't want that liquid. Get the pan nice and hot before sauteing. Let it heat after you add the oil before you add the veg. You want to hear that gentle sizzle when they hit the pan if you're browning them. Dry your vegetables before roasting them if you're washing, because that excess water creates too much steam and then can prevent the browning. So especially when you're doing potatoes, vegetables like mushrooms that have been washed. Then use enough oil for roasting, but don't drown the vegetables. So a light coating is going to help them brown and crisp up nicely. You're going to season throughout the cooking process. Don't wait till the end. Add some while cooking. It brings out the vegetables' natural flavor. And then a little at the end after tasting, but be careful not to add too much salt. Also taste them while they cook. Make sure they are what you're looking for. And you can develop a sense of what a properly cooked green bean or broccoli floret should look and taste like and feel like. Then use some acid to wake up your vegetables, like a squeeze of lemon, little lemon zest. Some apple cider vinegar can make your vegetables taste really bright. Your broccoli, it can brighten it up nicely. Then remember, fat carries flavor. So adding some butter or olive oil or sesame oil can make your vegetables much more satisfying. You can add a little bit of that at the end of the cooking process. And then don't be afraid of browning. It doesn't necessarily mean burnt. You want the balance. You want that deep golden brown edge. And that's where you got a lot of the good flavor without it burning. Then preheat your oven before putting them in. That'll help them to begin browning immediately. Delicate ingredients should be added later. So don't put everything in at the same time. Garlic can burn, leafy greens cook quickly. Fresh herbs, you add those to your soup or your stew near the end. And don't automatically peel everything. Potato skins can be great for fiber and nutrition. Sweet potatoes, you scrub them well, but you can leave the skin on. And then learn which vegetables like high heat and which don't. So potatoes, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, carrots, peppers, onions, they work well with roasting. Like I said earlier, spinach, delicate greens, they need very little heat and time. And then use your cooking liquid. If you've steamed or blanched vegetables, don't automatically throw it away. You can use that in your stew as your vegetable. And remember to finish your vegetables rather than just cooking them. So ask yourself, does it need more salt? Does it need some acid like lemon? Does it need butter, olive oil, fresh herbs, cheese, some pine nuts sprinkled over the top, or a sauce? And then enjoy your wonderful vegetables. Even your kids will love them. Thank you for joining me today. And next week, we'll be back to talk more about starches and how to cook them well. Have a wonderful cooking week. Do things by trial and error. Don't put too much pressure on yourself and just enjoy the process. I'll see you next time.